revenue projection. Within the financial year 2024-2025, the year that ended in June 30th, this year, we saw the revenue projections being revised up until the point of supplemental revenue 3 at the end of financial year, moving from a target of 2.9 to 2.4 trillion. But if you look back in the past, in the previous years, missing the revenue targets is not something new. It's not something that we can credit or say this was a particular instance or an outlier within the financial year 2024-2025. Over the past almost 10 years, our budgeting system and our financial planning has always shown that we have missed our targets. And notably, the gap between the target and the actual has been growing. Revenue generation and revenue collection has been growing, yes, but the gap between the target and the actual has also been growing. Around 2012, our revenue gap, or the gap between the target and the actual, was around 30, 40, 50 billion. Now we are looking at something 70, 80, close to 100. So it is more than just the shocks that came with the citizen uprise and the rejection of the Finance Bill 2024. There is more, a bigger and a deeper systematic issue that needs to be addressed. Why are we seeing this shortfall? Number one, our assumptions when we're making revenue projections have not always materialized. So government needs to look back at the assumptions, at the projection, the fundamentals that inform the projections that are being made so that they're realistic. One of the things PS Muya has mentioned is the growth in the private sector. We have always put quite some emphasis on the private sector growth that will then relate or realize into revenue collection, but that has not been the case. Secondly, the frequent changes in tax rules contributes to uncertainty that is not harmful to the economy. And this has been discussed in several platforms. Last year, we had the medium-term revenue strategy coming into place. The intention of the MTRS was to provide that predictability, that stability in terms of revenue reforms, so that business people, citizens, investors can have an outlook, a 3 to 5 year outlook on what to expect in terms of revenue reforms, and therefore create some sense of stability and predictability. But what we have seen is that the revenue targets, so the actual implementation of the revenue strategy has not really been followed to the letter, and so the concerns of uncertainty and lack of predictability still holds. And thirdly, as a response to that also, is the issue of revenue leakages. Our projections may have some credibility, but the leakages in the system still exist. Leakages starting from tax exemptions. At the current system, our tax exemptions are about 500 billion, which is a significant amount. Literally, that is double what we spend on the health sector, providing health coverage for our country, Kenya. So we need to look at these revenue leakages, so that as we're making exemptions, then we ensure that we're making revenue projections for what we want to collect, but also sealing the loopholes that lead to seepages or leakages of the revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ruth. Predictable tax environment, as well as addressing the problem of tax expenditure. So coming to you, Andrew, sticking to the question of reforms. And this question was targeted at you intentionally. And I think over the past few years, we have seen citizens being more informed, both on the kind of budgeting the government is doing and as well as the tax reforms. And as Ruth mentioned, the 2024 protests around the finance bill was a good example of an informed citizenry. So the question is, how can the government better design its reforms to balance Kenya's fiscal needs, because we do have fiscal needs, including debt service, and while also being acceptable to the citizenry?
Thank you. You've brought me back to the issue of, say, the Gen Z protest. And I think it came at the right time. Why do I say so? It's because it put the government on the spot that something is not working. Can you listen to us as citizens? So what does that tell us? we have a citizenry that is well knowledgeable. You'll be surprised, most of the people who are active in terms of demanding more, in terms of the government policies, are people who are just coming from college, university. These are people who have gone through the free education system that was there. So you find they have the knowledge. Then two, we cannot run away from the fact that we live in a technological era where information is available at the palm of your hands, just by your phone. You know, you can do a short analysis of what is happening. So once government understands that, then now we start coining and framing our policies towards that. Now, first and foremost, for me, I think having looked at it, I would suggest, or I would tell the government that it is now mandatory for us to embed public participation, or if we may put it that way, public participation in budget formulation and tax policies. That one needs to happen now. I know we have a bill in Parliament concerning issues to do with public participation. I'm not so sure whether it is an act, hopefully, because it would have laid down a framework of how the citizens are involved. So what you may call public participation is not public participation. I can comprehend what is saying in a tax, in a finance act bill, finance act, or even the budget. I can understand it, but who caters for the mwananchi back in my rural area, say in the far-flung area like Turkana? So how are we bringing them on board? See, so the government now needs to look at that. How are we going to communicate our policies to our citizens? That is number one. They have to do that. So they have to find a way. And in doing that, they also have to bring in the element of technology. ICT ministry now has, for me, I look at it as an open forum for them to use all available forms of media, social media, and what have you, to communicate. That's how you bring in the citizens so that they can own some of these things. Then number two, even as we look at how we're going to engage the citizens, let's also talk about having progressive tax policies. I think my panelists here have talked about it. We need to know. You see, it is very strange when you wake up prior to 2024. We woke up and then we're told now there's a housing levy that will be charged. That was not in your budget. You know, when I wake up, I go to work, I know at the end of the month, I expect to receive this. Then all of a sudden you're hit with the housing levy. All of a sudden you're hit with CHA, all of a sudden. So all these changes bring uncertainty. And this uncertainty now rattles the public. So let's have a tax policy that is, predictable, something that, we can sit down and say, okay, why don't we monitor it for the next 2-3 years? What has been the shortfall? How do we now look at, say, the leakages? Something that we can comprehend, understand, and we can follow through. If we get that, then I think the government now will be doing it well. Then the third thing, communication. I cannot stress that more than enough. The government is not communicating with the citizen. Unfortunately, that is what is happening. That's why, as someone who really did analysis of the Finance Act 2024, there were a lot of good things in it. How did the government communicate? They failed to communicate. So, as someone who probably is looking at housing levy, I would wake up and shout and say, no, this one, no. But you see, the government needs to adopt a much more citizen-centered communication where we communicate openly and tell them, you know what, why we're bringing this is because we want to achieve 1, 2, 3. This tax we're collecting, how are we spending the tax? Let's have open forums whereby we have candid and open discussions. And once we do that, then I do believe that even bringing in new policies or coming up with new frameworks for the government, it will be very easy for them because they have communicated, they have taken in the citizens' perceptions about it. it's more or less of an interaction. But until then, I don't know. Maybe we'll experience more of these unsettled citizens and what. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Effective public participation anchored on effective communication. So coming back to you, Dr. Mbia, you spoke about liability management, and this is in the context of managing our public debt better. My question is, should debt restructuring be part of the conversation around liability management? And secondly, we've seen the government shifting. I called it creative, quote unquote, borrowing approaches, such as securitization. In responding to that question, you can tell us what securitization is and the fiscal risks that it presents.
Thank you, Veronica. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Oh, lovely, thank you. One second.
No, we might change the mic.
This one I give away. Okay, this is better. So going back to the first question, and I think the big question is not just about liability management. What I was reading as Veronica was going through the question, by the way, how much time do I have? I have 3 minutes to convince you. So this is a big subject actually, which can take me quite a while, but let me try to rush through in the 3 minutes that I have. And so I think the elephant in the room is restructuring. I think that's a question I've been asked. In terms of the implications, when you talk about restructuring, it is something that you only do when you are unable to service your debt, as is the case in the public sector. Now, that is something that is not very, very well. And countries that submit themselves to restructuring would be countries in debt distress, not with high risk of debt distress, like is the case for Kenya. And restructuring can take very, very many forms, postponing the payment of debt as it comes due, changing the interest rates, haircuts, thank you very much, haircuts, and also could be reorganizing the maturity profile, I said about delaying payments and so on and so forth. So it is something that you don't just rush into it. But there's a better way of dealing with public debt other than submitting yourself to restructuring. And it is the situation and the right nomenclature, and thank you, Veronica, for using that word, is liability management. And here, you are looking at an active and a proactive stance in terms of looking at the maturity profile of your public debt. You are looking at your cost of debt. You are looking at the repayment program that you have on your debt. And you are looking to make sure that you've got the lowest cost for your debt. You are looking to make sure that your risk of debt, kind of like default on the payment, is minimized as much as possible. But at the same time, that exercise must also be anchored on ensuring that you are providing enough finance for the government to finance its both capital and revenue expenditure. And so I want to say, thankfully, there are a lot of tools that are available for active liability management. And that is something that if a government prioritizes it, there are very good examples of how various governments, and I can quote some examples in Africa, Benin, Seychelles, Senegal, Rwanda. I mean, these are countries that have been involved in very active liability management and have been able to significantly reduce their cost of debt. In fact, I do submit here that when those countries issue Eurobonds, they are able to issue Eurobonds at a lower cost than Kenya. And that is because of very active liability management. So I think on the liability management and the question about restructuring, I have done a bit of justice. Now, the question about securitization, this is a long debate. And looking at it just straight from the word securitization, it relates to either assets or revenues, where an institution has got a pool of assets, and that pool of assets, then you structure them in a way such that you can sell them to investors through what is called an SPV, a special purpose vehicle, which is created so that you transfer those assets to that special purpose vehicle, and it is that special purpose vehicle which manages the assets so that the returns from the assets can be used to pay the investors who have given you the money. So that is on the asset side. And you can think about assets in Kenya that can be put in such a vehicle. But I think what is being asked today here is the securitization of revenues, where you've got future cash flows. Like for instance, I think the best example would be like the road maintenance levy, RML, where you've got a predictable income stream, and you know that in the next so many years, this is how much you'll be collecting in terms of road maintenance levy. And so instead of waiting for those years for the money to come in through the levy, then you organize and package that revenue in a way such that you transfer the revenues and the rights to the revenues to a special purpose vehicle that you create. And so that when the road maintenance levy is collected in future years, instead of it coming to the institution in government that receives it, it goes now to that special purpose vehicle that has been created. Now, if you look at it, there are, okay, the word Veronica has used, innovative, yeah. There is an innovation around it, because you are saying rather than wait until 10 years to get this accumulated revenue from road maintenance levy, let me get the money now and then use it for whatever purpose. But I think that's where the catch is. Once then you get that money up front, what you do with the money? Unafanya nini na hiyo pesa? I think almost everybody understands why. Unafanya nini na hiyo pesa? And I think that's a big question we should ask ourselves. If that money is not used to repay some existing debt, then you then end up in a problem in terms of incurring a fiscal risk. Because that money will not be available in future to do that which it was meant for. Like for instance, if you securitize road maintenance levy, then the collections in the future will not be available to maintain the roads. So where will you get the money to maintain the roads in future? And so that's one of the big questions. The other one is the governance around it. I mean, how do you then make sure that you structure a special purpose vehicle that properly takes the risks on that revenue and make sure that there's transparency in the way the structure has been set up? Because if there is no transparency, the people who will invest in that SPV to give government money, they will ask for a very high return. So it will cost the government a lot more in terms of now the money that they have received upfront than if they used another mechanism. And so there are a lot of things that one has to be very careful when you are getting into a securitization program, because there are those issues about the pricing, transparency, the special purpose vehicle, and the fact that the government does not get the money immediately. The last point I want to say is that usually governments do not give security for what they borrow. I want to repeat that. Usually governments don't give security. When you buy a treasury bill or a treasury bond, you don't ask the government to give you a guarantee, do you? You don't. And also when we do the Eurobonds issues, when we borrow money from banks, government does not give a security. But in securitization, government actually gives a security, because the security is the underlying asset or the revenue streams that you transfer to the SPV. So there's a whole big question. If you have got a market that is functioning perfectly, then the persuasion to use securitization is sometimes a little bit difficult. But that is something that we can discuss more on the issue of market failures and how you deal with market failures. Thank you, Veronica.
So thank you for that response. And as the good book, the Bible says, let them those who have ears hear. But I think my key takeaway is on transparency. I am still looking for a government document explaining what securitization is. Honorable Didi Njoro confirms there is none, and so I think that is one of the areas that we'll be speaking on in his keynote address. Coming back to you, Ruth, given the situation we are facing today, is there still scope for fiscal consolidation, or should we forget about it? And can we still pursue fiscal consolidation and still safeguard our growth?
Thank you very much, Veronica. I think one of the biggest ways and the biggest gaps we have with our fiscal consolidation is on expenditure management. And if we can find the grasp and the grip on controlling our expenditure without compromising development, without compromising social protection, then we will have some progress and we will have light at the end of the tunnel. Normally, in our financial years and our budgeting, we see that at the beginning of the financial year, there's really some optimism in terms of the budget deficit. There's optimism in terms of proper debt management. But as we get to consecutive revisions of the budget and the supplementary budgets, the numbers widen. Every time there's an increasing number in terms of budget, so we increase the budget, the projected expenditure, we reduce the revenue targets, and so our fiscal deficit continues widening, and we veer off from our fiscal consolidation path. And so one of the best ways for us to progressively work towards fiscal consolidation is to control our spending and enforce expenditure discipline. The second issue, and I will not repeat in detail, is what former PS has mentioned, Dr. Muya, about liability management. If we are able to properly implement liability management, and we look forward to a detailed session where we speak about liability management, and I hope we will have Dr. Muya with us again to share insights. I think we will nail it, because we spend a significant part of our revenues paying off debt, on debt service. Revenue that would have then been spent on essential expenditure, so that we are able to then reduce the non-essentials. So that is another critical area that we need to work on. And last but not least, there is progressive space for us to continue looking at our revenue mobilization efforts, so that as we reduce expenditure, we are also increasing revenue progressively, so that the gap is then reduced. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ruth. And I think us better managing our expenditures remains key, because that's where the bigger problem is. So coming back to you, Andrew, I think one of the questions, or one of the things that usually come up a lot is around governance. And my question is, to what extent are our fiscal challenges as a result of gaps in our governance?
Right. Let's face it, before I get into it, let's be honest to ourselves as Kenyans. Politics and economics in this country go hand in hand. Mheshimiwa here will tell us politics is about interests, and interests emanate from the economy. So let's agree, first of all, that is a problem in itself, because as long as we cannot separate the two, then we'll definitely have issues with how we handle governance. And why do I say that? Look at the challenges we're facing right now. Our fiscal space is shrinking. Why is it always shrinking? Why are we talking about revenue shortfall? Why are we talking about, say, matters to do with corruption? Why are we talking about non-compliance with Article 223 on supplementary budget? All these issues are mirrored in issues to do with governance. So ideally, yes, we do have an issue with how we govern or we run the government. And basically I look at it in terms of, are we complying with the laws that we have enacted ourselves? Are we? So that is where the problem starts. It's about governance. You have the laws, you're not following the laws. If it is about borrowing, to what threshold? Are we as a nation able to borrow over and above our current level where we are? Those are some of the questions we need to ask. Why can't we make a budget that mirrors the revenues we collect? Why can't we live within our means? Daniel projected the austerity measures. Out of 10, only 2%, 20%, if I may put it that way. We are in compliance with 20. So what does that tell us? It tells us that we have a systematic problem with governance and how we govern this country and how we sort of implement those laws. So for me, I think if we are to get out of this particular situation, let's strengthen some of these institutions. You know, when we did the Constitution 2010, it came with so many bodies that are here to help us govern this country. The Office of the Auditor General, very key. But when we look at those reports, who listens to them? Who really pays attention to what is being said? The Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission, vital in trying to, for lack of a better word, whip us to comply with the laws that we've done. But who's talking about that? Why do we have the PFM Act? Because it clearly states on matters you were discussing about pending bills, and it clearly states first charge should be those pending bills. They are not being paid. Why? So it's just a matter of compliance, and compliance I related to governance. So it's very simple. We have everything. It's for us to comply. And once we start complying with some of the laws that we as a nation created and formulated and say this is how we want to govern our country, we want to govern our counties, then we have it. So until then, we'll still have the problem of economics and politics. So I'll finish it off and say it also matters, do we have the political goodwill? If we get the political goodwill, then some of these things will work. But as long as we do not have the political goodwill, then the effects will be seen on the economic side of this country. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive response. And for those of us who are students of economics, the first thing we are introduced to is The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, and it was an essay on political economy. Probably there's a reason why in those olden days, politics and economics were one, right? So with that, I think I'll pass it to the audience. Because of time, I would restrict it to 2 questions or 3 questions and indicate the panelists you'd like to respond. And I would request the media to hold on their questions for one-on-one session with the panelists or any other person within the room. So for the rest of the audience, if you have a burning question and to whom you'd want to direct it to. The first 3 hands, I see 1. Unfortunately, the media is...
Some space, please.
Yeah.
We have 2 here, Veronica.
I'm taking 3 and not from the media.
No, it's not media.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, which and which?
There's a gentleman here.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
There are 2 ladies here. Okay, we can take the 4 hands. I think I saw 4 hands. We are starting with Ms. Janet. Keep it short so that we're able to take the 4 instead of 3. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Veronica, and thank you, our panelists, and also the Rango's presentation.